I was very, very happy to have our first presentation, Jeremy's presentation. He covered quite a few of the AI music generator things. And I believe this will be published. Isn't there a printed proceedings here?
There is a printed proceedings. I don't know how and when that comes out, but Outcats.
For all of us, if you remember in Jeremy's presentation, he had links to everything. And I have links in mine too. So even if you just get the proceedings online, please refer back to Jeremy's presentation that was just happened here in the previous hour. He's got links to just about everything. And I'm so grateful he took my call last night because I was sitting there frantic. Saying, what on earth am I going to do today? No minute like the last minute, right? And what it is after talking extensively, knowing what Jeremy was doing, I decided to take a different tack instead of just reproducing what he did. He really covered the field very well, and I'm happy to take the question from a different perspective. Jeremy's a composer and a performer. I'm much more the performer, much less the composer. So I bring a different perspective to it all. So we can certainly talk about everything you saw in the last hour. What I wanted to start out talking about here today was synthesbians. And now synthesbians, referring to synthetic thespians. It's just a portmanteau. It's a word we made called synthesbians, which is synthetic. Actually, one of the most famous first synthesbians was How in 2001: A Space Odyssey. How many people have here seen the movie 2001? Do you remember the scene in which he locks Dave out of the capsule and Dave gets back in and he starts pulling Hal's memory modules one at a time, and meanwhile Hal is singing the song Daisy. And the song gets slower and slower as his memory modules are pulled. Anybody remember that one? Yeah, a measurable scene in the movie. That recording was actually done at Bell Labs in 1961 as part of the Max Matthews program Music 5 as the first computer music in existence. So what Kubrick was doing back in 98 and 99 was taking the work from 1961 and making it, putting it out, popularizing it. We're now really used to synthesbians. One thing that occurred to me that I didn't put up here, some of you who follow politics know that we've just had a recent political storm in the culture wars about the green M&M. Anybody know what I'm talking about? They changed the footwear on the green M&M from boots to tennis sneakers, and there was throughout the nation a considerable amount of protest because apparently there were a number of people that are quite attached to the green M&M. I'm talking about the animated figure in the commercials on television. So they were really quite attached to the green M&M, and they were really upset about her change in footwear. What does it tell us about AI, and what does it tell us about our culture? What it says is that culturally, we are already in the AI world. We accept without question non-human spokespeople. In other words, it's now embedded in our culture. I'll give you another example. For instance, if I was to tell you this is my traveling body, and I'm actually a little alien creature inside this body, and if I was to pick up my head and put it over here, my head continue to talk to you, there'd be, probably more than half of the people here would be concerned and, alarmed. But there'd be a significant minority of you that would be amused, but not in any way alarmed. Because if I took my head off and put my talking head here, you're already used to the idea of androids, robots, of anthropomorphizing what really is artificial intelligence. So you say, oh, well, that's interesting. You wouldn't believe what I saw this morning at TCF. But again, it wouldn't cause panic. Whereas 50 years or 100 years ago, if I pulled my head off and it was starting to talk over here, there would be panic in the room. But I bring this up as a point, not today at all. You say, oh, okay, well, I've seen this on science fiction 10 years ago. No big deal. Those of you who remember the Boston Dynamics, the bipedal and quadrupedal robots. Anybody here remember the Boston Dynamics Okay, they're now bought by Microsoft and they're much more mainstream. You know, now we have, it's no longer science fiction to talk about killer robots. You know, in other words, all these brand new wars that they've given us now are now the testing battlefields for all our new weapons. I'm sorry to bring this up on a beautiful morning. You know, the Marine slogan, kill them all, God will sort them out. Well, now the AI robots, the killer robots that are already in existence, that are already out there, actually have to do target acquisition. They have to decide whether you're friend or foe. So your life at some point, or someone's life, is going to depend upon the pattern recognition of an artificially intelligent robot. How did we get to this impasse? Well, slowly, step by step, sort of like the frog boiling in the water. You think about that. The fact is, well, without going into killer robots, you can look this up on Google. There are people that know far more than I do about it, because that's not my field. I'm not a soldier. As a musician, how many of you have heard of Hatsune Miku? One, anybody else? Two. Okay, so we have two people here that at least have a little touch into Japanese culture. Hatsune Miku is one of the most successful synthesbians. She's was introduced in 2007, and she's made millions of dollars on her career already. She can make a few $100,000 in a month of performances. And she is a data set inside a computer in Japan. What Hatsune does, Hatsune is the 16-year-old girl with two long purple pigtails. And some of her songs have gotten very popular. She's an example of a Vocaloid. Anybody ever heard of Vocaloids? Or to anybody over here, Vocaloids? Technology by Yamaha Corporation. What this is how do we get the computer to sing? I mentioned earlier how in him singing Daisy Daisy. Well, how do we get expressive singing by having the input of a text file? The way this is done, again, starting with the Vocaloid technology in around 2005, it's now been 20 years this has been out. They're on their sixth iteration of the Vocaloid software by Yamaha. And what they're doing is they're taking phonemes, which are the basic building blocks of speech. I think there's something on the order of like 44 or 45 phonemes in the English language. So to make an English language Vocaloid, I take the 45 phonemes and I concatenate them in different ways to produce words. And then I add a pitched element. Because really my vocal apparatus is a series of attuned acoustical filters. I have a buzz source here, I have my larynx, I have the formants that are formed by my mouth, by my sinuses and so on, all the things that make the filter characteristics of my speech also create music. So Hatsune Miku is actually an English and Japanese language Vocaloid. That is, she's a synthetic singer. So when we talk about AI, we've had synthetic singers now for just about 20 years. I mean, from 2007 on, they're now part of pop culture, at least in Japan. You're hearing more of it here in America, but you know they walk very softly here. They creep up on you. You'll be listening to music and you won't even know that it's AI. That's just the nature of it. The question I ask here is: can synthesbians be good enough for a Turing test? Everybody knows what a Turing test is. Alan Turing, the original test was to see whether you could tell the difference between artificial intelligence and a real human being. Well, will we be able to tell that in a music video or in a live performance? If you go to one of the shows, Hatsune Miku's shows, she's actually she's a laser projection onto a crystalline sort of display in the center of the screen. Sort of what they did with Tinkerbell and Peter Pan back in the 80s. But it's now getting more and more real. In other words, we're seeing human robots. AI has made powerful use of our desire to anthropomorphize everything around us. You know, what was I thinking about? The insurance company Geico. Yep. Everybody know Geico, and what do we have for Geico? We have this gecko, right? The Geico gecko, and we can instantly recognize it. Well, I was thinking, where did that come from? and I thought back to my childhood. What about Pink Panther? Remember the Pink Panther? The Pink Panther in the mid-70s was associated with the music of Henry Mancini. You know, had the Pink Panther theme, and then you had this animated cartoon character, Pink Panther, and the emotional qualities, Pink Panther was cool. And then Pink Panther was later used to advertise, I think, home insulation or something like that.
Yeah.
Yes.
The pink.
Well, where we got the Geico gecko was from the Pink Panther. You know, in other words, our society, you have been primed your whole life to unquestionably accept artificial constructs as anthropomorphized beings. So this whole thing of synthesbians is not trivial. It's actually something that you should actually examine and examine yourself, your willingness to talk and take direction from such a thing. Or here, now we're in an election series where we have synthesbians trying to put out political ads. In other words, all the deep fakes, all the fake news and so on. So before I go further with this, I want to take questions about Vocaloids, synthesbians, these topics that we're bringing up here, the application to artificial intelligence. Question, anybody?
So you asked if they could pass the Turing test.
Yes,
And the Turing test is usually like a conversational thing.
correct.
And so then the question is, if you're asking a synthesbian to pass the Turing test, is it like, are you going to do it as like a traditional Turing test? Or are you going to be like, here's a video of a singer singing? Is this, AI, or is this,
The first pass of it, of course, is to simply say, well, can you accept this person as human? So the first test is the easier one. Can this deep fake look like a singer, so much so that you think, oh, we have synthetic personalities? So you were presented in the last talk with a rock band that was entirely synthetic. As a matter of fact, they weren't trying to pass the Turing test. I love the drummer with the little drummer. I'm going to definitely find that band and listen to them. They clearly have something going on. So the second thing you were proposing is an easier one. The harder one will be in a live performance where I'm a holographic projection and you question me, you interact with me, you talk with me, and I convince you that I'm human. That's a much harder Turing test to pass. But what I'm trying to say is there's a great deal of money and effort, just like we're trying to make self-driving cars. There's a lot of commercial interest in synthesbians. Why are they interested? Why, if you own Sony Music or Universal Music, why would you be so interested in synthesbians? Anybody?
Have to pay somebody.
Well, consider Hatsune Miku. She's a 16-year-old girl. Hatsune's never going to get pregnant. She's never going to get drunk. She's never going to strike for higher wages.
Shave her hair off.
She's never going to shave her hair off. None of those things will happen because she's a data set inside your computer. So anytime you want to unwrap her, you press go, there she is performing, and then you press stop and she's back in your computer. She's actually a series of numbers. Where does this bode for human creativity and performers and so on? Well, that's going to be up for us as a society to take a look at. What we said in the previous slide, the ethical implications of this is questionable. We don't know yet, and we're in sort of an unknown territory. There's a lot of fear and trepidation. Basically, when I see something disruptive, I think there's a great opportunity. Maybe we have an opportunity here that we're too afraid to even look at. Who knows? Any questions about this? Okay, I don't, oh dear, I do not have my time. Oh, there's me. Modern life. This is what passes as a wristwatch nowadays.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, looks like we just got maybe 30 minutes,
You have till,
a little bit after 12.
till 12:15.
I brought a piece of hardware here, a very old piece of hardware from like 1998. This is a Ford Triton, a hardware synthesizer, and I wanted to talk to you about some of the things I'm doing with this. I've appeared here at Trenton for many, many years, actually starting in 1982. It's when I was first here selling records out of the tailgate of my car. So it's been a long time coming. Let me just find this here for you. Okay. Didn't get a chance to sound check here. Guess I can see you guys over here, even though we have these screens blocking. Hey, there you are. Okay. The first thing I wanted to do to touch on here. Oh, yeah. Okay, well, I'll start with a split horn patch. I have one sound here for my left hand. I have a completely different patch starting with F here. Why this is interesting is that completely different sounds that are overlapping each other, making it sound more real and acoustic. Also, I'm paying attention to the velocity, how quickly my finger strikes. When my finger presses down a key, maybe a 50 dB dynamic range here, and it's not just louder or softer. Notice that the timbre changes considerably. Here's another example. So what that does here with a piece of hardware like this is this allows us to do fairly complex things and sound more realistic. In addition to the change of timbre and loudness, I have here what's called aftertouch. For instance, if I had to press the keys, there's this A minor chord. Now I'm going to press the keys a little harder after I've depressed it. In the piano, this would do nothing. But here in this aftertouch, I'm going to introduce vibrato after the fact. Watch. Just doing it by my touch. So whereas this is a familiar looking interface, this series of white and black keys, what I have here, because of modern electronics, is something really quite different. It's a little bit more expressive than a piano keyboard. Truth is, when I press a key here, I'm actually throwing two sequential switches. And I have a microprocessor that's measuring in microseconds the amount of time between the first switch closure and the second switch closure. It's generating a 7-bit number, which refers to the velocity number. That's just a computer measuring how long it takes this to go from one switch closure to the second, and then assigning all these different timbre and other possibilities to it. Is there a question here before I go on? Yes.
It sounds a little bit like regular MIDI, but you've got two key presses, right? Is that the difference?
No, this is absolutely standard MIDI.
Okay,
This is again, this machine's from
Well, I know they
1998.
they can handle velocity. That's how they do it.
Yes,
Okay.
what it is your velocity is a parameter in MIDI, and you can map it to whatever you want. In this case, I'm mapping it not only the volume, but I'm also mapping it to timbre. so it sounds more realistic. So John Philip Sousa, don't get me started. This is when I march all the kids out of the auditorium with that sort of music. Let me go to another example here. Here's a dynamic orchestra. In past years, I've come here and shown Kurzweil instruments that do this sort of dynamic timbre change. Here, I have an arco string. But if I increase the velocity, I have a drum. This shows, this is some aspects of dynamic expression using live performance, a live performance instrument. Using the keyboard as actually I would call it an abstraction layer. I don't know, are you familiar with the term abstraction layer? What we're doing here is we're making something very complicated far more simple. I'm taking an interface that some of us are familiar with from playing piano, and I'm applying it to a really different problem, which is live orchestration. In other words, I'm orchestrating with my fingers. As I said, I can do string. I can do. There I'm combining a sounds like a piano, combining it with strings to make sounds that are not currently available on a piano. In other words, I have a wash, I have a pad of strings behind a piano thing. So you are able to do compound sounds with instruments like this. These instruments used to be expensive. In 1998, this would have cost like $1,800. Now I can get very close to this for no money at all, absolutely free. That's some of the actually initiatives we're doing using Linux and doing things in Africa, where they don't have money for these sorts of things. Kids are able to download and make this sort of access completely free. Yes, question.
There's a lot of this idea, what originated back in the early days of theater organs, where you had what's called second touch,
Yes, indeed.
where it didn't measure the velocity, but you simply had a second set of
Yes,
contacts.
at
The
the
harder down you push.
right, in a theater organ, you would have a pressure sensor underneath each key. And it actually could do it individually. Just now, the computer instruments have finally caught up to like 1920. You know, this is, hey, we're trying hard, up to where they were in the teens and twenties with theater organs.
Of course, the idea there was to replace the 60 or 100-piece orchestra in the pit with one instrument.
Right.
A guy by the name of Morton did that. And it was a heck of a lot cheaper to buy one of those instruments and accompany your films and to pay all these musicians, you know, to play.
Well, there's that one thing,
today.
which is the idea of having one musician be able to replace others. But the other idea was to increase the possibilities for a musical soloist. In other words, what can we do in a new solo instrument to make this more powerful? And of course, this sort of instruments were resisted. I can pick an instrument up like this for maybe $300 or $400 secondhand in eBay. As I said, this is a 25-year-old instrument. It still lives, so I haul it around like this. The idea of one musician replacing many, well, there's difficulties of polyphony. You know, of many instruments are playing different sorts of things. I myself am grappling with that in different ways. Some people play pre-programmed stuff, but what I like to do is I like to improvise the music. In other words, I do concerts of live improvised classical music, which is fun, but it doesn't replace an orchestra. What this does is give more power to a soloist. So as a soloist, you can express things that you couldn't before just using a guitar or piano. Was there another question over? Yes.
You've said a couple times what you're doing is making it sound more realistic. But does that mean I'm trying to make it sound like an orchestra or just different or whatever I want it to sound like?
For me, I have very little interest in having it sound like an orchestra. Because if I wanted an orchestra, I'll hire an orchestra. If I want to hear an orchestra concert, I'll go and sit in on a rehearsal or a live orchestra concert. That's not the point of this thing. The point is to make it sound more acoustic or more complex, more pleasing to the ear. Right now I have 2 speakers. When I do these things in concerts, I'm currently using 8. And I have completely different sounds coming out of different speakers, so the sounds mix in the air. When they mix in the air, they sound a lot better than just coming out of single speakers. A question? Yes.
Are they using this technology in Broadway? In a
They
lot
use
of
not
these
only in
theaters?
Broadway, most of the
Phantom of
movies.
the Opera and all of these, what?
Yes, indeed, they do.
They are.
It's, well, as I said, it's controversial.
Uh-huh.
I was not only the head of the Poconos Musician Union, but back in the late 80s, I was a guest. I think we had a big jazz band cancel out on a union meeting. So I went in 1987, I went in with the Ensoniq Mirage and my speakers and start playing for the Musicians Union. And they walk in and you can imagine how horror struck they were when they see the actual enemy has actually entered their midst. Oh my God, no, not you. That attitude actually has changed. If you listen to most movies today, say for instance, the soundtrack to Avatar, or almost any major budget movie is extensively using this sort of thing in a studio context. The only difference here is I'm taking this out and I'm playing it for you in a live performance context. I'll give you an example. Here's an acoustic piano with no fancy stuff at all. Express it. There you go. Nobody's gonna confuse this with a piano. It doesn't sound like a piano. But our ears were used to hearing electric piano. Our ears have become accustomed and accepting of a sound that 100 years ago, this would have been startling. And instantly. Give you another example. So, let's see.
Any questions at this point?
Yes.
How many channels is that?
Well, right now, we're only listening to these two.
No, I mean, the instrument, how many channels does it have?
By channels, do you mean how much polyphony?
No, it's a MIDI device. How many MIDI channels does it support?
It supports all 16.
Oh, okay, that was my question.
It typically, what you're hearing on, when you hear a movie soundtrack or whatever, they're using all the different channels and doing, all manners of orchestration with this live on the computer.
Polyphony, yeah.
What I'm doing is I'm using a single MIDI channel, I'm scanning the keyboard and I'm doing this stuff in front of you live.
Gotcha.
So there's a significant difference between studio and this is a live performance instrument.
Mhm.
If you go to my website, which I think is the bottom of the screen, on my website, I talk about classical music of the future. Of course, it's classical music of the present. That's just a
Or the past.
one pass, but we have this already. The fact that this is something new and what I'm doing is saying, okay, well, this could be a concert instrument. Yes,
That is, I'm assuming, an FM synthesized instrument. It's not it's not you're not using, recordings of strings. You're not using recordings of brass. It's synthesized.
Actually, it's, this, like all modern instruments, say it's a typical, like the modern version of this, the Nautilus has 9 different sound engines in it.
However, it's not a sampling keyboard.
This one is extensively sampled.
So.
They say, for instance, if I go
Well,
back. to
that
the-
brings up the ethics of, which string section are you listening to when you call up the strings? It's entirely possible to take the string sound from the Philadelphia Orchestra as a sample and put it in there. And just because I'm a union musician from way
Yeah,
back.
no,
I've worked
that
with the
conversation
Philadelphia
ended
people
about 1990, 35 years ago.
Yeah.
The fact is that, all the major manufacturers have extensive sound files of cellos, violas, violins, basses. And there's a few premier sound libraries where you can get the London Symphony, for example, or some of these others. But if you're really serious about having that sound, there are orchestras in Eastern Europe, for instance, Prague, many orchestras in Eastern Europe, you can go over with $5,000 or $10,000 and you can get an orchestra for like 3 or 4 hours of rehearsal to play your score. So given that you can get a real orchestra to play your score, people don't need to try to make this be that. There's not much point to it. The point here is what can we do to expand music as a soloist? That is, it's not speaking as a string player, but as a keyboardist. What can I do with keyboards with this interface? Or when I do acoustic guitar with this as well. I play classical guitar. So if I'm here with my guitar, I can have strings, I can have voices, I can have all these things under my fretboard, just like I'm doing it here with this keyboard.
There was a time when if you went to a Broadway show, you had probably a 30-piece orchestra in the pit.
At least,
That changed to 15 guys who all doubled. I've played shows and I know, every time I play a show now, they expect you to play 3 or 4 different instruments.
that's right,
That then became 8 guys in the pit with the synthesizer.
right.
And
Well, actually, it became 4 guys sitting around reading a manual, trying to figure out how to make this work.
I think it's interesting that the entire soundtrack for Bernstein was not done by the New York Philharmonic. It was done by the London Symphony.
Right. There's a lot of politics involved with the licensing, with the recording. You bring up very good points in these, oh God, it used to be Roy Hare, the new union president for the American Federation of Musicians. Tony
Roy Hare?
Briscoe, I think his name is.
Oh.
Anyway, the musicians union and many other unions are dealing with these problems of artificial intelligence. How do we deal with this ethically? The fact is, the wedding bands went out in the 80s, starting in the 90s, you'd hire a DJ. And most of the wedding bands disappeared outside of a few major metropolitan areas. A great deal of the work for musicians is now gone. Because I'm old enough to have worked back in the 60s and 70s. And I remember what that was like. Ooh, hello. Okay. Woo. I was old enough to work then, so there's a lot of pain of readjustment. There's actually a fair bit of print about this, how this is both affecting arts and writing, sculpture, dance. Every creative endeavor is now under challenge from this, because the AIs to musicians, to creators, they look like a huge plagiarism machine. In other words, the idea of a large language model means that, okay, well, they're going to scan all my works and use my turns of phrases. And of course, musically, we have the situation where you have shows being put on with one guy with a synthesizer, or actually, we have shows now being put on with nobody in the pit.
Right.
You just press play on a tape recorder. Now, my personal belief is what is old is new again. In other words, I believe that we will see a resurgence in live music when people discover how much greater it is to be present for something spontaneous. I see I'm running out of time, so let me give you a few more sounds for this and take a few more questions. But sir, your point is well taken. I've lived it. Let's see. Can I get something here? Here's alien torque music. I close my eyes. Play whatever comes up. This is a sound I pulled out at random. There is so much prevalence of electronic dance music. You don't often hear electronic music that is can be soft and sensitive. Yes, there's a question. Anybody? Okay, well, it's piano. Not a rhythm. We typically feel it before, we feel it in the rhythm. Not nearly enough time to go into what you can do with these. I guess what I would say to you is that, first of all, as this instrument's 25 years old, they're far more advanced now. This is what I could drag around. This is available for a few $100s secondhand, but there's stuff that's absolutely free that you can use that is great. And that's why I mentioned before that I'm working with people in Africa and elsewhere in the world where they don't have money, but they have talent. And people want to have access to this. There's never been a better time for a musician to expand themselves and try something new. Now, there's some folks that may call this a fake instrument with fake sounds. I would take issue with those folks, but that's just me. Right now, perhaps I'm in the minority. But maybe not. It's hard to say. I'd say that our ears have become used to this electronic sound, and it's up to us as a society to see, well, can we do something useful and musical? Can we do something truly new? Can we do something that's not really derivative? If we're looking at AI with large language models, is it possible to come up with something that is so far from derivative that it's a brand new piece of work? Here I'm working in the field of music. My answer to that, of course, is yes, it certainly is. But like any other technology, we have to apply ourselves and learn what we can do with it. My choice has been to work with these pieces of hardware and do as a performer. But what you saw much earlier today and what you'll be seeing throughout the rest of the day is being able to do this without keyboard skills, without standard musician skills, but be able to use your discernment to use either text prompts or input to create new pieces of music that don't sound as derivative as they might. There's a few more yes, in the back.
The orchestrating with the finger velocity thing,
Yes,
you demonstrated vibrato,
yes,
timbre, and then the dual track thing.
yes.
Is it possible to control other parameters such as pitch?
Well, for instance, if I'm
bend out of it like
synthesizing,
a
if I'm
guitar.
synthesizing a saxophone, I want honk, I want squeal. I want, all sorts of lip things. If you're talking about flute or any woodwind, there's a lot of extended techniques. Even the piano has 20 or 30 different sounds that are not necessarily harmonic. So the idea is to map all the possible sounds of an instrument to different expressivity layers such as velocity, aftertouch. There's now extended keyboards that give you far more power. The idea is to with a human player to be able to express them simultaneously, that is in parallel. In other words, to do it live, to be able to do it improvisationally and so on. That's the hardware problem, but that's where I'm actually currently working. Yes,
To answer your question, yes, on pitch, one of the wheels that he has there is a pitch wheel. Tapping of that.
I have other controllers. I have pitch, I have vibrato. I have all sorts of other timbre things as well. They're called real-time controls. But right now, people and computers don't get along very well, as you've noticed. We have these crude things, mice, keyboards, ASCII keyboard, screen. As this develops, we're going to be able to do far better voice prompts and so on. Looks like one last question before I stop. Anybody have a last question? Yes.
I do a lot of arranging and I find that a keyboard like that, it comes really in handy. I want to hear what I just worked on because I can MIDI it out and listen to it through the keyboard and it makes a really, gives me a good impression of what I've just written.
Absolutely, as well. When Stravinsky was composing the Sacre de Printemps, he had a piano. He had an acoustic piano by him, and all those harmonies he did with the flat seconds and all that, he plugged it under the piano so he could hear it in his ear. This is the same sort of tool for a composer where you can get a real good idea of your orchestration with this and then write conventionally. So I'm very happy to share this with you. Thank you all very much.